Welcome to Modern Day Apocrypha.
You forgot the A. Modern Day Apocrypha.
We are talking about SolarWinds, the big hack that has been potentially ongoing since 2019.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And I feel pretty ignorant because until today, when I actually looked up what this was, I know we talked about this a couple of weeks ago that we were going to look into this. And I did, of course, last minute research and pulling it up. I knew nothing about this. Today was the first I had heard anything about this and what this was.
Yeah, isn't that terrifying that this is not mainstream news? I mean, it is like to an extent, but it's just buried underneath all this other content.
Well, and I don't think I'm the only one because I asked my roommate too. I was like, hey, do you know about this thing? No, what's that? Oh, it's this thing that's been going on for a year and here's the crazy. Wow, that's insane, man.
Yeah, and so this has significant implications. We're talking like energy grid, nuclear codes, all of this business is potentially on the table. And I was over at some of my friends' house, this is probably 3 weeks ago, and they weren't aware of it either. And so they just do a Google search, and it's everywhere if you just search for it because it's legit, it's sanctioned by the government, or not sanctioned, but it's like spoken of by the government and all of this business.
Sounds like it was sanctioned by some government, but hey.
Yeah, depending on which government. Well, if you're new to the podcast, first of all, just want to say thank you for joining in. We're excited to have you. Modern Day Apocrypha is really about trying to find not so much education about different topics that we want to talk about, but we want to do a little bit of research so that we can have a thoughtful conversation and just start exploring some of these different topics and ideas. And today, if you couldn't pick up from the intro, we're talking about the SolarWinds hack, which is impacting a lot of U.S. government agencies. It's impacting a lot of the Fortune 500 companies, and it spreads internationally in some instances as well.
Yeah. I'm going to just jump right in. I think this was fucking brilliant. Like, you take away the scary whatever. Whoever thought this through, damn. Bravo.
It was very planned and deliberate.
Yeah, and I don't know. Stuff like this just gets me excited. It probably shouldn't. But with all the fuckery that's happened in the last couple of years, I just see world events like a TV show now. Ooh, this is what happened in today's episode of The World. Because otherwise I'd just probably be a little depressed and sad.
Yeah, it definitely keeps things interesting when you see stuff like this. So what part of it is something that you thought was really well planned out? Like, what piqued your interest about it?
A couple of things. One, how it was set up that they targeted a specific company that provided a software service to a lot of people, that instead of just doing what I would think of as a normal hack, let me access and then access loud and bust through like a bank robbery. Mm-hmm. Let me subtly put a little piece of code hidden in your thing and wait for a couple of months for you to push an update out to everyone else. And now you just push my malware out to all of your clients.
Yeah, so it reminds me, so first of all, it seems that the U.S. government is pointing its fingers at Russia. I don't know why, but
this week I saw, it was CBS, CNBC. They said originally thought it was Russia. Now officials are saying China.
Sweet. So I was just about to mention that it seems very Chinese in the way that China's government looks at the long game and everything that they do. And this was a very patient attack. It was one, like you said, that took course over, well, hell, it looks like it started in September and it didn't actually go live and start impacting people until March of 2020. So we're talking, 6-7 months that they had these little nuggets of code inserted, and they were willing to wait 6 or 7 months, which really isn't a super long duration, but it smells of how China operates.
Yeah. The other thing I thought was just incredible. Think about the timing of this. You wait until shit's going weird in the world in a way that nobody's experienced in our lifetimes. No one's going to be looking for something subtle. Like in a normal time, this might have gotten caught sooner.
Wow. So you're cross-referencing this with the COVID pandemic.
Yup.
So that I hadn't even considered that. I can't fucking wait to talk about this. so, but think about that. COVID started getting known in China. I think it was like December of 2019. It was before 2020.
Yep.
Right before. And it didn't really start hitting the US until February, March timeframe. Coinciding with that same time frame is the software update that was actually released where they started distributing this malware to all these other companies and agencies right in March. I think it was like March 4th, I think I read. But regardless, that same time frame. And mind you, the CDC was one of the agencies impacted.
Yeah. It's so crazy.
So if you can, wow.
I know. Just take a minute to let that sink in. Like,
wow. So what's got me so mind fucked about this is that, and granted, we're speculating a lot. So, and I want to be
welcome to modern day Apocrypha.
I want to be clear to our audience. If you're not familiar with the program and you're new, we're not experts in either of these fields, but we enjoy having genuine conversation, and it's completely uncut. We do one take. So we just want to be really open and just kind of have dialogue here. And we hope that you join us and get to experience as well. But what's got me mind fucked about this is that if we're saying that SolarWinds was planned to cross with the COVID scenario, then COVID-19 would by default be a planned incident. And
see, I wasn't even thinking that far, so now you're mind fucking me back.
Okay, well, fuck you back. But, and then take that into account with some of these other reports, which this is a whole nother topic, so I'll touch on them very briefly. But the rate at which the COVID virus infects people is very suspect. And many scientists are suggesting that it's been genetically engineered. And that could be the case, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it was released as a like a weapon, but it's an indicator that this was intentional. The other thing about COVID is that it was right there in the city of Wuhan with a lab where they were testing specific strains of coronavirus.
Yeah.
A third point is that everybody blames it on bats. I'm sure you've heard this if you're listening, that bats were carriers of COVID and it made its leap into humans and blah, blah, blah. Well, from what I've heard, I'm not an expert, I don't follow bats, but from what I understand, the bats migrate in the region and they are not in Wuhan during the winter, which is when this whole pandemic started.
Shit.
So take all of that into account. Look at this SolarWinds hack, which just like you said, if you're going to plan an attack and you've got this COVID pandemic planned, and then you also want to try to find all of this information, well, now that there's a pandemic, all these different government agencies are talking to each other, so you're going to be able to track those communications more and get more volume coming through your hack. And it's a distraction, so it's less likely to be found.
I feel like for this episode, we need a map and a bunch of like pins and red string. Like, I just feel like that's where we're headed. It's great.
Yeah, where are my Criminal Minds fans at?
It's interesting as we're making all of these, assumptions and lines and, well, what about this and this and this? And now this paints a clearer potential picture than I've seen or heard anyone else talk about before. The other thing that I thought was incredible about this that made me feel like I'm watching an Oceans movie, like Oceans where they plan these big heists and shit.
Yeah. He says that because I have a hard time watching movies and I have almost zero pop culture game, but I have seen one or two Oceans movies.
Hey, we're aligned on this one. You're going to follow me. Perfect. Oceans movies, right? They plan out these huge, elaborate heists, and they make these moves that don't seem to make sense to their other moves and how they're getting there, and they just all falls together into some elegant, crazy heist. Before you even brought in, the Rona potential link, I was thinking about, they don't even know what the attack was against or what they were trying to gain because it's so wide. Let's say they were going for one single piece of information. What's the easiest way to hide that shit? Let's grab something that's so wide, and again, going back to the patience, we'll wait, we'll let it trigger, we'll catch everything, so when we find our single piece of information that we want, no one will know that's what we're after, and we have it, and then all of this other shit that doesn't matter.
Sure.
I thought that was
entirely plausible.
A brilliant, I don't know if that's their angle, but to me, shit, that's fucking brilliant. The other aspect was they've stolen so much data. If they're going to try to sell it to whoever, bad people are going to buy stolen data, all you have to do is compartmentalize the data and sell only a piece here and a piece there. And if something gets traced back, you cut off that cell. Almost like shell company inception.
Right.
And then your big operation is still intact and you still have all this information. And if that was the angle where you're going to steal everything and sell pieces to the right audience who wants those pieces, now it's protected and no one's ever going to see because it was such a wave of stealing everything.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, if all of this speculation is valid and founded on reality, that's genius. It's thoroughly brilliant.
Whatever angle, I think it's one of the most brilliant heists I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
Movie or not.
So we've spoken a lot about this. I want to take a step back and just kind of explain at a high level what this hack is, how it worked, what the general operations were, so that way, if you're not familiar with it, you can at least have some common ground.
That's important.
And
I jump in too quick, I know.
Oh, well, you had me in all the way too. I mean, just committed. So you'll be able to find a better explanation than what I can give, or probably what you can give. But at a general level, there is a company called SolarWinds who runs security software of some sort for different agencies and Fortune 500 companies, and I guess anybody who needs to make sure that they've got secure servers. And within that, they have a product called Orion. And this is, I would call it a platform of, it's like a suite of different services. So one part of Orion might handle your internet security, one might handle your firewall, et cetera, et cetera. What happened was this, we don't know who's behind this, but let's just say China, since that's where we kind of left off. A Chinese intelligence agency inserted malware, so malicious software, into that Orion platform, which is effectively the backbone for all of these companies and government agencies' security infrastructure. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's got access to their firewall credentials. It's got access to all of these different security components. So when they infiltrate the Orion suite of services, or that platform, and they insert that code, as Tony mentioned, it was released to all of SolarWinds' different clients. So that's government agencies, that's Microsoft, Intel, Cisco, all of whom are also in the security business, and other companies used for security components.
Right.
That software update gets released to all of those different clients. Over 18,000 different clients is the estimation.
And I think, just to really see the big scope of this, one of those clients out of those 18,000 was Microsoft. How many clients does Microsoft have? So think about how many clients these clients have, and we're talking millions or billions of individual pieces of personal data.
100%. And a perfect example of that is Microsoft uses, I believe it's Microsoft Azure, I think is how you pronounce it, which is their cloud storage. And the Pentagon has a contract to use Azure for its security storage. So just like you can see how this just webs into billions of different pieces of personal data, like Tony mentioned. So this software update was injected in the platform between September and November of 2019. The software updates themselves didn't really get released until March of 2020. And then what was really sophisticated was that whoever's responsible for this went back through in June and removed the breadcrumbs that linked it to the other different verticals. So let me kind of re-explain that last section. So whenever you have a hack, just like Tony mentioned, our ignorance would make us come in there and be loud, kind of like a bank robbery, is the analogy that you used. Well, in this case, whenever you're doing a hack, you're leaving little bits of code behind. And so cybersecurity professionals can go through and they can actually track that code and figure out where it came from, what the original breach location was, what type of code was vulnerable, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what happens is because they used Orion to kind of web off laterally to all these other verticals, and by verticals, I mean like different clients, then they were able to say, all right, we jumped from Orion to Microsoft and from Orion to Cisco and from Orion to MasterCard and Comcast and AT&T. And they went through and removed any breadcrumbs that linked Orion to those other platforms. And then any breadcrumbs that linked those other platforms to the tertiary platforms. And so you can't see what information was shared across which channels. And so it made it very, very complex. So all of that happened between March and June of 2020. And this hack wasn't disclosed until December of 2020. So we're talking September 2019 to December 2020 that they had free reign to go and grab any pieces of information from any of these companies and government agencies that were hacked. And we're still not even sure that that's the end of it.
Right. And I think once they started figuring shit out in December, they said this was also unique because normally when a hacker's found out, they stop. This didn't. It continued to grow and mutate and change and go back in and go through all these different places. So there's, you know, if you look just at the highest level, Orion has those 18,000-ish customers. Of those 18,000, they don't even know who all's been hacked or not, or who's been compromised or not. And then if they've really gotten into those systems, and again, it just keeps jumping systems, they don't know. One of the articles that I read said that they estimate that over 1,000 people on the hacker side worked on this simultaneously together, which again is something that's not been seen in our lifetime. You've had teams of hackers go and do shit, but at that 1,000 level, that's where they also think this has got to be sanctioned by some sort of a government to have that kind of resources. Again, think about payroll for these people for a year, paying 1,000 people, and then imagine each one of those needing electricity and at least a computer to be able to do this shit.
It's expensive.
That's hella expensive. Where's your payoff? What are you gaining from this? What's the angle?
And that's I'll say that for later on in this episode. Yeah, it's fascinating. It really is. It's very sophisticated. Just to give you an idea, SolarWinds is the company that specializes in this type of business in cybersecurity, and they are the ones that got hacked. So first and foremost, that's just kind of an indicator of how sophisticated it was. The other thing here is that they have spent well over 10,000 hours, SolarWinds has, trying to figure out what the actual source of this hack was and how all of this unfolded. That's a conservative estimate. So they said, I might misquote this, but they said that it took them 10,000 hours to go through and figure out the source. And then I'm all over the place with this one. 10,000 hours to figure out what was hacked.
Oh.
And then, because they covered up all their breadcrumbs, and then they still didn't know the actual source of how they got into the Orion platform, so they spent thousands of more hours trying to find that.
Did they find it? Have they found that yet?
Well, kind of. So it's very complicated, and I am not qualified to speak on it. Part of it entails a very poor password, SolarWinds 123. And so that very well could have been the exploitation that allowed somebody to get in. But it goes beyond that, because they also understood how the hackers understood how to get into the actual like foundational infrastructure and get essentially admin privileges to the entire system. And so there's a lot more to the story than just one weak password in one compartment
Right.
of the platform.
Because then when you can mask yourself as an admin, things don't seem out of the ordinary because you just seem like a regular user. It's easier to run around and run free without being flagged.
That's right. And yeah. So basically you're just not going to be detected as easily. And that's kind of the thing here, is that this code was implemented for well over a year before it was ever noticed. And it was noticed by one company who just happened to see like a duplicate entry for a cell phone or something like that.
So what that was everyone's working at home, and it was two-factor authentication. So typically how two-factor authentication works, you go in, you get a text message or something on your phone, and you have to type that code in on the computer. What they noticed was that this individual had two phone numbers registered. They said, that's odd. Let me call him. Called him up. Hey, did you register a second phone number? No, I didn't. Okay, and that's when they started to uncover and dig, and they dug a ton in their own system to figure it out and go, nah, it can't be SolarWinds. And they kept digging, and finally they were like, shit, this has to be here. And that's when they contacted up to the other company, and all of everything happened.
Hey, FYI, here's what we found. I mean, what a mess, man.
Yeah, and I think those FireEye guys said that they never would have caught it had they not been in the same type of business to do cybersecurity.
Oh, sure, I believe that.
Because it was so well done. The one person had said that it's like how well it was done was like a Rembrandt. Like it was a piece of art. And the deeper you go into it, the more details reveal themselves. And so it's literally a piece of art.
I bet that was exciting for them to work on a personal level.
Sure.
Like that would be a brilliant project to have to go in and uncover. It would suck.
Right.
But if you can appreciate that level of sophistication, it would probably be enjoyable, fascinating work.
Well, and if you take passion in your work, writing code, working on or tearing apart or following the trail of someone who's so far beyond your own abilities or what you could imagine, that's going to grow your own abilities. And like you said, it's going to be super fascinating to work on.
100%. So all of that points to this idea that we don't know if this is the only instance where this has happened, because it took multiple security companies over a year to detect this. So where else has this technique been used?
Whoa.
Could it be infiltrating other agencies? Could it even be within the same system again, but in a different manner? Like,
that's something I hadn't considered. So if it was just this one company that had all these accesses, what about other companies we haven't known or recognized? And because this technique has been so good about covering its tracks, fuck, bro. When I was talking a little bit about this to my roommate today in preparation that we were going to talk about this tonight before he was leaving for work, I'm like, man, every conversation is recorded. Everything's just hacked at this point. You know, if someone wants to hear what I'm doing in my house, they can turn on my TV and look through the camera or my phone or my computer. And this shit just doesn't freak me out anymore. It's just, it is what it is.
you just accept it.
That's the world we live in. And
Well, who was it? One of the major players in the home security space found out that their security cameras were hacked and people were able to just look through the cameras and stuff. And I know that's going to weird a lot of people out.
sure.
Personally, I don't care. Like, I do care, but it's just, it is what it is. Like,
What are you
that's
gonna do
kind of
about
exactly. That's kind of the mindset that I'm in. People are concerned about their Amazon Echoes and their Google Homes and all of this, Siri listening all the time. And I'm sure it is. Like, and I'll tell a sub story here in just a second. But are you going to go get rid of your phone?
I mean, that's the option. Like, you have to get rid of your phone, any type of electronics, and you have to literally go live off the grid. And while that works for some people, and they will never hear this podcast because they're off the grid, I would rather be a part of society as it is, even if it is fucked up. Sure. Let's see where this goes. Let's see what happens. I can't just put my head in the sand and pretend it's not there.
Right. Yep. So the sub story that I wanted to tell was just a guy on YouTube. So first of all, I don't mean that to be like discrediting, but it's not something that I've personally vetted or anything like this. But what he did was recorded himself all in one take with, I don't know, like 6 or 7 different websites up on different tabs online on his internet browser on his laptop. And I think it had like Cortana. I think it was Windows 10. And he showed all of the ads there. And he's like, okay, got all that. On his phone, he had a little notepad. I think that's where it was. It's been a long time since I saw this. But anyway, he typed out what he was going to do so that he didn't talk about it. Basically, what he said, what he typed out was, I don't have a dog. I don't talk about dogs. None of the ads are for dogs. But I'm going to talk about dogs for the next 3 minutes and dog toys. And so he does. And he's like, I really wish I had a tennis ball for my dog so that we could play fetch, and we'd get a rope so we can play tug of war with my dog. And he goes on and on. He refreshes 6 or 7 of those tabs, and like all but 2 of them had dog toy advertisements.
Yep.
Shut the fuck up.
And I think it's just neat because now the world serves me what I'm asking for. Like, hey, internet, you there? Give me this shit. And sometimes I still can't find shit on Google. It's interesting. If I'm going to buy something and there's a product I want, it will come to me because there's advertisement and there's money putting that in my face to try to get my money. But if I'm looking for information on something, god damn, trying to search and find some of these things on there, it's impossible. Why the fuck is that?
I don't know, man.
I just want to see the alien videos, man.
Yeah, where are the aliens at? Wow. Yeah, so scary world that we live in.
I think it's exciting.
Everything's screwed. So I want to go back to what you said about China. Seems like we're so quick to point fingers. Like,
oh yeah,
the government or the officials. I won't say the government. It could be like Microsoft and other cybersecurity professionals. The professionals are so quick to point fingers at who's behind this, and they blamed Russia, and it could have been. But I didn't find anything that was like supporting evidence that this was a Russian hack.
Before we knew the depth of it, I did. So early on, it made sense that they said Russia because there was something that Russia did in Ukraine where, and this I also think is fascinating, terrible, but fascinating. They did this crazy hack where they hacked a huge percent of all devices in the country and then set them to self-destruct. So I think 10% of the tech, from what I was reading today, 10% of the tech was destroyed. So you think ATMs, you think personal computers, like checking out and trying to use like card reader stuff like that. 10% of the shit in country was fucked, just destroyed. And so you have to take a while to reestablish all of those things to be able to get the country back up and running. It's super destabilizing.
Fascinating. So I had heard very recently, I don't even remember where I heard this, but I had heard that Russian hackers had hacked the power grid in Ukraine. I don't know if it's the same thing that you're talking about because you're talking about like specific devices, but it's related, it seems. But whenever I searched for that, because I was curious about what you were talking about, and it came up with that Russian power grid hack. I didn't want to say anything until I had actually like seen that because I'm just not familiar with it. But so that makes sense.
So the line that they drew was, well, they've done this in Ukraine already, where they mass hacked a bunch of shit, There it was more like we talked about in the beginning, kick my foot in the door and blow shit up. This was a more subtle version of it, which again, to think about that level of sophistication and patience, it's different. The scale is the only thing that's the same. Right? Because your intention is, let me go in and destabilize and be loud, and we did all this noise-making shit so we could do the next whatever of our plan. This was designed to never be noticed and to exist for forever. And one person caught an anomaly, and that was it.
We got lucky.
We got lucky.
Well, depending on how you look at it. I mean,
Right.
it'd be lucky if we found it in, month 2.
Well, think about this. It's that philosophical question of, if you're going to have a terminal disease and you don't know if you're going to die or not. So let's say that terminal disease is whatever. You can live a year and a half regardless. It's untreatable. I know about that for a year and a half and know I'm going to die. And so you've got that weighing over your head like, oh, I'm dying. Or you wait until 2 weeks before and you find out you're going to die. Which is better? Which makes you more lucky? Oh, we caught it. Yeah, but I'm still fucked and there's nothing I can do. Or would it have been better to be ignorant and happy and not worried about it because it was going to happen either way?
It's a perfect analogy there. Yeah, I don't think that there's no good in this. Like, if that's what you're looking for, there's nothing good. Unless you're on the side of the hackers.
Right?
And then
Bravo. Again.
Well done.
Popping some champagne for you later.
Yeah. Man. So what I had heard was that I saw different numbers for how many Fortune 500 companies were involved in this. I saw anywhere from 100 to 400 out of the top 500 biggest companies. I saw that.
So that's the S&P 500. All of it.
Right.
Fuck.
Pretty much. That's on the high side. 400 out of the 500.
But still, that's literally a whole goddamn index.
Right. Yeah.
Jesus.
I saw that 9 government agencies were hacked. I don't know if you saw anything different, but the ones that I wrote down were the Treasury Department, the Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Commerce, Department of State, the CDC. I don't know if this is considered a government agency, but the National Nuclear Security Administration was on the list.
That's a little unnerving.
They're the ones who control all of the launch codes.
It's okay, guys. We're not going to do Mars over again. Yeah, hard pass. Let's not do that.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk about some of the different potential outcomes of this. Like,
Okay.
what are the threats? What does this mean? Well, you know what? Actually, before we get into that, Tony, you kind of mentioned that we weren't really sure what they're going for. So you had said that they might be looking for like one piece of data, but they made all of this mess behind them so that it was a mess for us to sort through.
Sure.
And that's ultimately what I had seen as well. There was a 60 Minutes episode on SolarWinds. I don't know when it was recorded, but the guy said that he was like getting really exaggerated, in my opinion. This was cyber terrorism. This was a terrorist threat. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, first of all, I'm not going to try to pretend like I'm the expert in this space compared to Homeboy. But if I think of a terrorism incident, it's going to be loud. It's going to be intended to scare people. This was intended to be as quiet as possible for as long as possible.
However, if it is the next level of terrorism, because this goes down a lot of rabbit holes, but I'm of the belief that most terrorism is set up probably on the inside to, look, now we have something to go start a war and make money. This, in my mind, that was the other thing that I kind of saw today. Let's make this good threat that, look, your good government found it. Your good American people found it, and we're going to crush the rebels or whoever they are. And look, it's these people. No, it's those people, and we're gonna bring Al Qaeda to justice. It's that all over again, except for, oh shit, this was a little obvious and we figured it out. A lot of people, well, how do we make it so big and so vast that people can't put the pieces together, and we really think it's terrorism now, and we'll really get behind a war wherever we decide we want to go kick in the door.
So I think that's a very plausible scenario. The reason why I personally don't think that that's what's happening in this instance.
I don't necessarily think so either, but I thought, that's an interesting potential.
This is where we're getting into like a whole new era when it really comes down to it for warfare. And that is that it's very clear what the appropriate response is if Russia comes over here and drops bombs on San Francisco.
Right.
Like, that's obvious that we go to war. I mean, some might not think so, but that is going to be the response. You can go and point back to example after example after example. That's called an invasion.
Well, the idea is if we do that and we don't respond and tell them you can't fucking do that again, we just say keep bombing us.
Right. It's like not hitting the bully back.
Right.
So that's pretty clear cut. You saw it with Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that's like the right response, I'll leave that up for debate.
History says it's an adequate response.
Right. It's pretty well defined. When it comes to cybersecurity, what is an appropriate response here? Obviously, this is severe and has very severe implications. We talked about the National Nuclear Security Administration was on the list of agencies who were hacked. If somebody can launch our missiles and our nuclear warheads, is that not an act of war? Like, let's think about that. It's just not defined right now.
Or flip it, hold them hostage.
Sure.
Hey, I have this shit.
I will detonate.
Give me what I want. And so it's a big flex where I think we've gotten to the point where, especially a lot of the developed nations, don't really want to go kill people en masse.
Right.
So how do we get what we want? Well, a lot of you've seen a lot of things turned to hostage in the past few decades, and threats, and no one really wants to deliver. Please don't make me do this. Just give me what I want. Well, then you see in hostage negotiation techniques, we realize you don't want to do this either. So we're going to play a little bit of hardball, and it's a mental chess game is really what it boils down to.
Real quick before we continue too far, the reason I bring all of that up is to say that if the U.S. wants to do something to China in this case,
What the fuck do you do?
I don't think that this would be the way to get the reaction, because it's just completely unprecedented at this scale, and there's not an appropriate level of action that I can conceive the U.S. government would want to take as a response to this if they planned all of this intentionally.
What if we go economic level? Hey, we realize that China, we come out, we get proof, whatever proof is. Mm-hmm. It was China, it was Russia, it was whoever the fuck it is, sanctions. We're going to shut you down. We're going to make everyone else scared, and we're going to manipulate because we've created a narrative to get our nation and then the nations who are also affected or almost affected to all turn on you. And it's this whole global bullying, and you're not the cool kid anymore.
Yeah, I think it's entirely plausible.
I don't think that's what's happening here either.
Well, I think that the global viewpoint, what you played out, is interesting because you can make China's various alliances kind of point their finger at them and be like, yo, that's fucked up, if we think that would be a reaction that we would be able to elicit from them. I think it's a stretch.
I do too.
The U.S. doesn't want to lay sanctions on China either because that hurts our economy. China can always respond back with other sanctions, and it also impacts how many goods and services we're selling to China,
Sure.
particularly in the agriculture business with like grain and corn and things like that. But yeah, it's interesting to kind of think about that. Like, and I think this is always on the table. Like, and this goes down the line of conspiracy theories, certainly, but
We've been there a lot tonight already.
we have. Well, we make a lot of assumptions. But a lot of them are, I think, reasonable assumptions that make things plausible. But what I think is interesting is that for anybody who just turns their head at the sound of the word conspiracy, you can go back and look at conspiracies that were actually true. And the one that I go to a lot is the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where the U.S. government intentionally infected or contaminated, I think it was the water supply maybe, in Tuskegee, Alabama, because they wanted to see how syphilis affected the African-American community down there. That's true. Like, it happened. And so if you don't think that the U.S. could do this to itself,
right,
everything's open at this point. And so the U.S. lost, in my opinion, all of its credibility with stories like that are actually true. The Bay of Pigs is another one to go check out during the JFK administration. All of this is on the table. It's fucked. It really is fucked. So, I'm sorry, I've gone on a rant.
No, it's okay,
9/11.
Man. I'm with you.
People who don't think that the Twin Towers were taken out by U.S. governments. I'm not saying that it was. I'm not even sure that I'm in the camp that thinks that it was. But I think it's on... Tony is. But I think that it's on the table, and we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't actually consider that.
For sure. Yeah, what gets me is the jet fuel burning and steel melting and the sheared iron beams like you would see in a controlled demolition. And then, the extra building that no one wants to talk about that also collapsed, that had all the, records and shit in it.
Yeah, so there are documentaries on that. But
this isn't SolarWinds. But anyway.
It's fascinating, though. So we started kind of going down the path of, what they were after.
For sure.
It doesn't seem to be... Oh, I know how we got down this path. The guy on 60 Minutes was talking about it being this act of terrorism.
Right. And then okay.
Well, I think you laid a plausible scenario that it could have been. And so I think that, again, it goes back to what we were just talking about. That's on the table. It seems that this was more of reconnaissance from my point of view, because they went in, they just gathered as much data as possible. Once it was detected and we learned about it, they continued because they were like, hey, we might as well get all that we can right now.
Right.
You've already robbed the bank. All my suitcases and bags are full. I'm stuffing it in my pants until the cops get here and I'm out.
Yep. And so what if that was the goal, was just reconnaissance? What if it was just as much information as possible? And then we'll take it back, we'll go through it, and then we'll decide what the fuck we want to do with it. That, I think, is potentially more terrifying than we knew what we were after and we just grabbed everything.
Sure, because it leaves out on the table what's yet to come.
Exactly. And as the world's just been getting weird, and they've been cliffhangering our seasons every 2 weeks with another weird, crazy fucking thing coming out. Okay, what's next? Keep that world series of what the fuck's going on Netflix. New episode on Friday.
Good luck.
Good luck. It's like the fucking Purge, bro.
Dude. So the reconnaissance idea came from a former, I believe he was in the NSA, the National Security Administration, and that was his hypothesis, and I was like, that makes a lot of sense.
It does. It's, of all the shit we've discussed today, I've thrown out some really fancy things that would make great movies, but let's be real, that to me makes the most sense.
It does, but then also, so I wrote down, when we want to talk about these different threats and outcomes, the Department of Energy, so immediately I think power grid.
Sure.
I think Texas, we all know what happened in Texas a month or so ago, a couple weeks ago.
The snow and the ice and everything got fucked for a couple days. Failed.
And I'm not saying that that was a result of SolarWinds.
No.
Could it have been? I don't know. I haven't looked into the whole Texas incident.
Well, are you talking about weather manipulation at that point?
No.
Okay.
No, but what I'm saying is that I'm going way out on a limb. Potentially, just like coronavirus happened to be well timed with the SolarWinds hack, perhaps the ice storm happened to be well timed with the power grid failing. And if you're in control of the power grid, it's an easy thing for Texas to do. the power company in Texas to do, point the finger at the bad weather.
Hey, shit's fucked right now. This ice is coming. They're not planned for it. None of their structure's there. So there's a really solid story to sell this and us never be seen, just like we're jumping from system to system and this hack has never been seen. Well, now we have access to the power grid. Let's try fucking all this shit while the ice is here and no one will ever know it was us practicing playing around. It's a stretch, but I follow your thought.
Right. Yeah. And I want to be very clear. I have not looked into the whole Texas power grid deal. We could know definitively that it was the weather.
Right.
I don't know. But that's an example of something that could have come out of this because the Department of Energy was on the list of government agencies that was hacked. So I'm thinking power grid.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that we don't know the entire extent of the information that was exposed or the control that they may have had, or still have over some of these different pieces of infrastructure. The Pentagon, I read, was part of this hack. I don't know if that was by proxy from the Microsoft Azure contract that they have, or if that was
something else,
just like a direct infiltration. The Department of Homeland Security and all of these defense agencies were on the list. What?
Well, think
what
about
does
this
that
too.
entail?
I've never looked at any of this stuff, but if you think about, football, right? You've got your playbook and what we're going to do in these types of scenarios. You got to believe that the Department of Homeland Security has a version of a playbook in certain scenarios. Guess what? Well, now someone just hacked in and sees all of our plays, all of our plans. And so that way, I'm going way out on a limb here, super speculating. Whoever, let's just say China, invades, they know exactly how we're going to do whatever because they know our playbook and they can completely outsmart it because they know the moves we're going to make before we're going to make them.
Fantastic.
All of this shit goes, yeah, reconnaissance probably makes more sense because now you just have all the options on the table.
Yep. And the Department of Homeland Security is very domestic focused. It's all within the U.S. I don't think that we're at any threat of being like physically invaded in any capacity like that. But because the Pentagon's also on there, I think like the entire concept that you laid out is completely plausible, like on an international and a domestic scale.
Yeah. Oh, well, we've got our little terrorist cell that's fucking shit up. We know the SEALs are going to come in and this is how they do. Okay. We're going to fuck with them because we know their moves before they make them.
Got it.
Oof.
Or another indicator that it was China. We know that China steals intellectual property. Now, maybe they have
all the Fortune 500 companies, they steal all the R&D shit before it's out, and then they do the crazy, it's okay, we've got slave labor, we can push this faster and quicker, and then you guys can.
And so that's like your next TikTok or whatever is coming down the pipeline, Huawei and the 5G stuff. Maybe it's even plans for how we're building our aircraft carriers because we know that they're expanding their naval presence.
That's it. That's it in my mind. Because like we talked about earlier, warfare is so much more economic than it's on a big scale than it is anything else. That's why we see sanctions back and forth and, trying to strike trade deals. Nobody wants to have their own people bleed in the street. And I think we all realize that in order to go to actual war, that's what has to happen. And it has to be either in my front yard or your front yard because there's not any place where it's not somebody's front yard. The world is pretty well populated. We don't have hey, we can go fight each other over here circle. All right, well, how do I still gain control and domination? Well, if I can bleed you dry economically, I win. Because I have more. War. Exactly. So it's a longer strategy, and we don't have to kill people in the process. I like this. This sounds cool. There you go. And we know that compared to all the other countries, the U.S. spends more on military and defense than the next few countries beneath it combined.
I think it's like the next 10.
If you're going to defeat the U.S., it's not going to be through military. It has to be economically. And so this shit makes so much more sense that that's the angle. If it was some other government, China, whoever, You come in, steal all our secrets, all of our plans to stay ahead financially without. The bully thing works for a while, but you still need to be able to make some moves and create some type of product that the rest of the world wants. If we can steal that before we put it to market, it's about who puts it out first, not necessarily who puts it out better.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and like we said, China has a history of doing this. Like, that is their strategy, is to steal the intellectual property that we've got. And if China can get ahead of the game, beat us at our own game of capitalistic innovation, if you want to call it that, they're going to get ahead. And they've definitely played the long game on all fronts, on the way that they've effectively gone through an industrial revolution. It's one of the reasons in my mind why they're dealing with all of this pollution and stuff over there. Obviously, they've got a large population, so that's a huge contributor. But also because they industrialized, because they're moving ahead rapidly, just like the U.S. did back in the 1900s, the early 1900s.
And unlike us figuring it out for the first time, they've had several countries to watch and therefore can do it faster.
They've got a roadmap. China's also playing the front on their currency.
Yep.
With the yuan. I don't know if you heard about this, but they have an e-yuan.
Like a cryptocurrency?
Yes.
It's
not a cryptocurrency.
Okay.
It's a digital currency for the yuan, which is China's currency.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so that's really fascinating to me. They're also stealing the intellectual property and, duplicating our efforts, playing this strategy on a lot of fronts.
Culturally, I love the mindset of Asian culture because they think in dynasties. We think in like fucking hours.
Yeah.
Or minutes. God, I'm hungry. Oh God, wait to talk about.
I mean, at the most, we think in 4-year intervals.
Right. And they're thinking in 1,000-year intervals, something that's so much further, bigger beyond them. So if someone missteps, it's no big deal because we're the tortoise, man.
It set us back 20 years.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Because 20 out of 1,000 is nothing. Oh, look, the U.S. bursted ahead in this. That's okay. We'll catch them. Because we're thinking 1,000 years ahead, not a decade or a couple years. It's insane.
It is.
Now, I know a lot of that has changed a little bit as they've adopted some more of things in Western society that's infiltrated over there, like with the Industrial Revolution and stuff. It's harder to keep a lot of that cultural control. We've talked about previously how things were over in Hong Kong versus mainland China, and you see some of that divide and that friction. So it's a little harder to control from the top down, but I know at least historically the top thinks in years, like 1,000-year increments, which I think is cool. I think we could take a lesson from that, not in a us versus them, but just as a slow the fuck down, people, play the long game.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it certainly helps that their leader doesn't have a term.
Well, I'm thinking more of an individual level. We're thinking, oh my God, I started a TikTok. How do I go viral in 10 seconds?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, play the long game. Well, okay, I did it for a week. Okay, I'm not really commit and put in the effort to master. And I mean, you look at a lot of these people, they, from a small age, they're mastering a skill or a talent that they will use for the rest of their life. We jump around, and I think there's a beauty in the difference. That's great. But that mindset of, it all boils down to like cultural bringing honor to your family. And, we don't necessarily do that as much over here. Again, different approaches, but it's so different and fascinating to me.
Some big brain stuff.
It is.
But it makes sense. Like if you have a goal, that's the way to go and achieve your goal.
Right.
I heard, I can't take credit for this. I can't take credit for many things, first of all. But somebody made an interesting point, and it was somebody on YouTube, so I don't recall their name. But they made the point that cyber warfare is in the advantage of the smaller, less developed countries, because just like we were talking about appropriate responses to actions of war. If you're looking at the cyber warfare, we have a lot that can be infiltrated.
Sure.
All of these different companies and agencies, you see. If we wanted to do the same back, and let's say it wasn't China, maybe it's Iran, still a very populous nation, it's wealthy, they're doing great for themselves, I guess, maybe, I don't know, seem like they are. But they don't have the Fortune 500 companies, that we do. They don't have the same type of grid that the United States has.
Think of it in terms of agility, right? You've got a next level fast fucking speedboat or submarine, and the US is an aircraft carrier.
They're going to move quick.
You can quickly move around. You probably can't do as much damage, but if you find a way to slip something in and cause a bunch of havoc, how do you, what's an equal response?
Mm-hmm.
All we have is like, we can crush you. But is that an equal and appropriate response?
Yeah.
It's interesting. That's a great call out.
So, there's not as much potential for us to go and infiltrate Iran if Iran was behind this. It's interesting. I don't know. I don't know what you do with this.
I don't know either. I think this was great to kind of dig into. I think this is fascinating to be able to live in the time that we are experiencing all this fucking crazy bullshit. Again, I'm just choosing to be really excited about, God damn, that's the first time that's happened. That's cool as shit.
It is cool.
Instead of, the world's going to end and we're all hacked and China or whoever's listening to my phone conversations. You know what? People were listening to your shit for decades already. So just
Ever
accept
heard of
it.
Edward Snowden?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's happening. So speaking of, that's a pretty nice little segue into my last thought that I had. We're blaming this on China. What are we doing?
Oh.
Because I shouldn't say you. I very rarely, if ever, hear about the U.S. hacked Ukraine, the U.S. hacked China, Russia, whatever. I'd love to hear Chinese media reports and Russian media reports.
Dial it back to your old school physical warfare. We never hear when SEAL Team 6 goes into another country and does black ops shit.
True.
Right? So on that level, that makes sense. We're aligned on that. Why would we hear about whatever we're doing on a cyber way, in a cyber aspect, to go fucking steal people's shit?
I think you're spot on, man. Like, I just don't think that you would.
Yep.
Not at scale. And I pulled this up really quickly because I had heard rumblings of this in recent memory. But I forget the entire story, but I read a quick brief. Essentially, the U.S. did hack the Iranian missile program because they shot down one of the drones or something along those lines.
I think I remember hearing about this.
And so, well, I'll tell you what. I'm reading this off of the BBC. I'll just read a quick blurb. It was in retaliation for the shooting down of a U.S. drone, as well as attacks on oil tankers that the U.S. had blamed Iran for, the New York Times said. I wanted to throw that in there since I was reading off of BBC and gave them credit. So maybe that's credit to New York Times. So anyway, I bring all that up to say that if we just went in and hacked them, in my mind, we already knew how to hack them, or we already had hacked them. It's not like, oh, they bombed an oil tanker, now let's kick off this program to end their missile program.
Right. We've been doing the same or worse, and now we got caught having it happen to us, and we're putting it on blast.
And now we're mega fucked.
Right. It's like the bully who got hit back, whining. Oh, he hit me. Bro, you started the shit.
Right. Yeah. So, I don't know. It's interesting to just kind of consider what the U.S.'s role is in the world, why things happen to us. That's not the only explanation. There are tons of different sides to this story, but that is a side to the story.
You know, I've never wanted to be president before. After today's conversation, I definitely know I don't want to be. Because you got to imagine just being aware of stuff like this, and then all the shit that we'll never hear about, and the conversations with the aliens that we're not ready to hear about yet. Like, all the things.
Hey, man, people asked Trump to tell us about the aliens, and he never did. If there was going to be a guy that was going to blurt his mouth, I think it'd be Trump.
So you can look back. It would have been Bill Clinton because he campaigned on, I will tell you if I win, what's up with the aliens. And then he got sworn in and
just like all presidential promises.
Yeah, exactly. And got real quiet. And so there's been a lot of people in that community that go, they're not allowed to. Once you find out, you're not allowed to.
Otherwise, you get JFK'd.
Yup. And that sounds like a good place to wrap up this episode. If you enjoyed our... this one was probably a little bit more speculation than most. But if you enjoyed this episode, check out a couple more that we've got. We'll be back next week.
I want to be clear. The hack did happen.
Oh, it totally did. It was all around this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, and peace out.